Hello, welcome to another coffee break with Kardec. A break to have some coffee, tea, or perhaps even a hot chocolate. And together with that, we bring some food for thought. And this food for thought comes from the book Genesis by Allan Kardec, which is amongst the books of Kardec, the one that deals with Spiritism in a more scientific way. And today we're going to talk about good and evil. And we've seen, and it's very clear in the first part of the book Genesis, the Kardec presents us God according to the information of the spirits. And of course, God is perfect in all senses, in its wisdom. God is perfect in goodness. God is perfect in justice. So, since God is perfect in all its attributes, the creation which comes out from God has to be just like God, perfect in all senses. And then we ask ourselves, so where does evil come from? What's the origin of evil? Is it from God? Then we have to think about evil in a slightly different way we've been thinking, probably to understand, since, as I mentioned before in a previous break, in the previous coffee break, that we have to use these attributes of God. Although we can't understand God, using the attributes of God, we can understand the creation and the different aspects of the reality around us, based always on this attribute. So if God is perfect in all its attributes, how come that God created evil? So let's see if it makes sense. First, we have the figure of Satan, or the devil. In our societies is that being with special powers, and is the one that is opposite to God. And if we place this being at the same level of God, but of course with the opposite attributes in relation to God, we would have two beings with the same power but totally different. It's like giving a big company to be run by two people with the same power, two CEOs, and both can decide everything about this company, but they think completely different. So when one decides, the other comes and changes completely, and the other way round, because of course they are going to act in accordance to their nature. One is all goodness, one is evil. So there will be conflict all the time, and we wouldn't see a stable world around us. We would see a chaotic world changing all the time according to the will of one god or the other god, and they will be fighting all the time. It looks more like the gods, deities in the Greek mythology, where they were fighting all the time because they understood and saw things in a different way. But then it becomes a sort of absurd to us to see that there is someone at the same level of God with the same power, but who has completely different attributes. So this idea then, comes, I think, from a tradition, from I would say incomplete view, and different from different times in in the progress of society as a whole, in different groups expressed in different ways. We always attribute its powers to a being. So the same way that we had distorted, incomplete view of God, we also had this view of a being, super being with power. So we, as humanity, at our level, we tend to give these divine beings, and I would say beings as a whole, superior to us, the same attributes that we have as persons. So we turn them into people with special powers. And of course, we have vices, we fail. So these entities would fail. So we've seen that the attributes of God give to God perfection in all aspects. So we discard then this idea of a being who is evil in nature, but has the same level of God. As I said before, creation will be constantly changing. So then the second option that we have is, so this evil entity has been created by God at some point. But if there is an evil entity created by God, so this shows that God is not perfect in all senses, because God created something that's not good, and then the attribute is God is all goodness. So how come? So basically, we see that there's no room when we use the attributes of God that we see at the beginning of the book Genesis to understand a figure, a being with superpowers who is evil or who has been created by God. Not even at the same level of God, but also not being created by God. So even evil can be personified, can assume the form of a human being. So, but we know there is evil in the world. So where does it stem from? Where is this evil coming from? And what do we call evil? Perhaps something that at some point for us, when we look at just a tiny fraction of a whole picture, we see that as something that is negative, something that is not good for us. But when we look at the picture as a whole, we see that, well, it's not exactly that way. That seemed to be evil led to something much better than we had before. So a perception of evil changes. So let's see. Although evil exists, we see where it stems from. And then the spirits they tell us that basically what we call evil stems from two sources. One are the sources that we have no control, and the other one are the ones that are the result of our actions. That means we have control over them. Let's look at the first one, the ones we don't have control. We are on this planet, material planet. We would say a primitive planet as such when we compare it to the descriptions of more evolved worlds where more evolved spirits are inhabiting. I always like to mention that, yes, we are moving towards that, but we are still in a world which is compatible to the level, spiritual level that we are. We need the type of experiences that we get in this world. Once we have evolved enough to require more spiritualized experiences, we will be in a world where things are more spiritualized. But our world's planet where we are now has 4.5 billion years, according to our sciences here. And this is the time it took to get where it is now. But it hasn't ceased undergoing this process of transformation, of evolution. So it's subject to natural forces. So we see volcanoes go into action, we see earthquakes, which are natural. We see hurricanes, we see all natural movements that are part of a constant renewal of our planet. It's interesting when we look at the history of life here on Earth, we see that to get where we are in terms of living beings now, it took us all this time since the beginning of the planet, 4.5 billion years, but it hasn't gone increasing constantly. It has gone through phases where life was almost extinguished from the surface of the planet for a renewal. We could say, oh, this is evil. No, it wasn't evil. It was actually a natural process of renewal. So, through this process, the life that existed could then come back in a more sophisticated way, more elaborate way. And basically, what scientists say is that 99% of life that existed at the beginning of life on this planet doesn't exist anymore. It's just gone. And we see the variety of life around us. Can we imagine the processes that, we went through so many times until we got to this point? We've gone through phases where the temperature here dropped, ice covered the planet. We went through other phases where the temperature went really high. And during those phases, basically life had a dramatic, a drastic transformation. And that was part of the process. That was important for the renewal of the planet. We know that sometimes, some flowers, they need very cold winters to bloom in spring. If they don't get the right temperature for the right period of time in winter, they won't bloom. So we know that this is a natural process. And we, as material beings, spiritual beings in a physical body, our physical body is subject to the environment. So what are we doing here then? What is this all for? Well, if we look from our perspective, limited perspective, we see evil everywhere. And let's go back to primitive people. They thought that everything in nature that wasn't agreeable to them was actually because God was angry. So this being, human being with superpowers, was angry. So this is natural for us, human beings, to be angry, but not for God. Especially now that we look at the Spiritist perspective with the attributes, we know that God doesn't get angry. Never. Not even a single time. So there isn't such a thing. This is a natural process through natural forces of nature, still promoting the evolution of the planet. And our physical body is part of this planet. It's material, it's in it. And our spirit, when we are in a physical body, we are, of course, we suffer from the vicissitudes of life in the physical world. But they are experiences that we need. Well, we see then these processes of transformation constantly exposing us to all this because we need to develop our spiritual faculties through that. Nowadays, we've managed to a certain point, of course, this is relative, but to tame the forces of nature. We protect ourselves, sometimes not completely, but we can protect ourselves from hurricanes, from earthquakes. In Japan, they have special buildings prepared to not to collapse during earthquakes. And we use our intelligence. So the vicissitudes that we have, the evils that we call here on earth, they are actually a way of promoting. They are like the cold weather for the tulips, for the bulbs that are under the soil there, waiting to bloom in spring. So these are the necessary conditions for us to develop our intelligence, to develop our moral faculties, to develop us as spiritual beings, faculties that we even dream of at this point. We usually talk about intelligence and moral as two wings, but we have many more that we will only discover when we've evolved enough in these two areas, generally speaking, intellectual and moral. Then we discover these new faculties, these new attributes that we have as we rid ourselves from our vices. So this process of spiritually growing here in a physical body, being in a physical body, he is actually through also being exposed to the natural vicissitudes and trying to protect ourselves. We are much more protected nowadays from the forces of nature than we were before due to our intelligence. We are still undergoing one of these situations on Earth, the pandemic. And all the efforts to promote health, to create vaccines, medicine, to protect ourselves from viruses, all this is actually due to us using our intelligence, but also combining that with our moral side trying to extend whatever we achieved to all humanity, understanding that the planet is a whole entity. Whatever happens on one side affects all the other sides. We've seen now the volcano in Asia. The dust went all around the globe. We know that if there is an atomic bomb in the northern hemisphere, the whole planet will be affected. If we have a sandstorm in northern Africa, Central America suffers. So we are a collective entity, humankind here on earth. And this is the view that we need to develop. We've gone a great deal in terms of progress, but we need to go much further into that. And the second aspect in terms of evil are the ones that we control, are the ones that result from our vices. I won't go into detail now because I'm running out of coffee and running out of time as well. But for that, the spirits brought us the gospel according to Spiritism. I mean, the information that Kardec compiled there, based on the guides that all of us have through this situation, which is the gospel lived, not only taught, but lived by Jesus. So the gospel according to Spiritism is the opportunity that we all have to look at this aspect, the aspect of evil caused by us, by our greed, selfishness, and all the vices that we bring from our primitive phase as spirits that are developing. And it's natural, but we have to read ourselves. I mean, you know, in this process of evolution, we read ourselves from the vices that we had, and then we acquire new virtues. So Kardec places it very well. The vices that are, the evil that are the result of our conduct are the ones that most affect humanity because they affect each and everyone every day, everywhere. We have some catastrophic situations, some pandemic every now and then, but the evil caused by us, by our vices that still live in us, they affect us every day. And so the gospel is a tool for us to start to look at that area and start our own transformation. We won't be able to transform others before we transform ourselves. But that is a topic for perhaps another coffee break some other time. Thank you very much. See you next week.